Okay, we are ready to go. We're gonna give it a few minutes, Will. Emily said that she was having a hard time getting in. So I'm wondering if we're having a hard time getting participants into the session.
Okay.
We are just going to give it a couple more minutes before we get started. I understand everybody's having a little bit of a hard time getting into the webinar. So we'll start here in just a few more minutes. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. I understand there might be some issues with everybody getting into the webinar, but we're going to go ahead and get started anyway. For those that don't know me, I am Diana Kelly, President and CEO of the California Outdoor Hospitality Association, our brand new name. We're super excited about it. I hope everyone else is as well. I think it gives us a much better, broader, introduction to the industry. We appear to be a broader force, so we're excited about it. Today we have Will DeRuve with Livingston Energy. Here to talk a little bit about EV charging solutions, and this has been a big topic of discussion. I've had a lot of calls on it. There's a lot of confusion about it. Do we do a grant? Do I put in a charging station? Do I change out my infrastructure and put in all new pedestals? What do I do? How much is all this going to cost me? Is the grid going to support it? Right? I mean, we've heard it all, and it's a lot, to be honest. And we'll probably do this again at our summit in March, because I'm assuming will confirm that every few months things change. So I will let you know that Will actually began his career in solar, PV, and energy efficiency for both residential and commercial clients before making his way into large-scale fleet management in the Northeast. At Livingston Energy Group, they're based in New York, and Will's the director of sales. Livingston also provides utility infrastructure upgrades to install both level 2 and level 3. There, again, another thing that I didn't know about, level 2 and level 3 charging stations. to both private and the public sector customers across the country, as well as software and networking platforms to facilitate public-facing chargers, fleet charging and management, and utility demand response capabilities. Will, those all sound like a lot of really big words.
Really big words.
Lot.
Really big words from a technology company that can be very scary and confusing to most people. Hopefully after today, we'll simplify the entire process for the majority of you, and hopefully answer some questions that are itching at most of the people on the call, and just try and give you guys some answers, right? I think nobody is ever going to force anybody to do anything, but it's good to have as much information and knowledge at your disposal so that you can make educated decisions for yourself, and then have partners alongside you to support those decisions.
Absolutely. I think this, as I had stated, it's a confusing subject, right? And we're just now at the tip of the iceberg in terms of information that's out there. When we had our summit in March, I had a really, really hard time just getting someone to come and speak on the subject, right? And so hopefully by this next March, I'll have somebody raising their hand to come do a whole presentation. But there's a lot to unpack with regards to the EV solutions, all the way from grants to equipment, to rebates, to infrastructure. So I'm going to let you kind of take it from here. If anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I will be able to kind of jump in and ask Will things as we go along, but we're also going to save quite a bit of time at the end for more questions. So please feel free to throw those in the chat and we'll get going.
I'm going to try and get right through this, guys. I really made it a serious attempt to not make it salesy and make it very educational so you guys can just absorb, and then I'll be very available for lots of questions when you guys have them. So we are Livingston Chargeport, Livingston Energy Group. We are based right here in upstate New York, just outside of Albany. It's where we got started. We are a developer, manufacturer, supplier of charging stations. So we actually build our own level 2 charging station right here in upstate New York. And on the level 3 chargers, what you guys probably have heard, a supercharger, a fast charger, we lean a little more heavily on organizations like Tritium and BTC or Rhombus or ABB, some names that get thrown around in the industry that have billion-dollar budgets to build really big, expensive, heavy equipment. We have done thousands of projects now for both the private and the public sector, doing lots of federal government work now. And obviously our goal in making this easy for the end user is really creating kind of customized, flexible solutions for the end user. We are a full turnkey deployment organization, which means our company can and will handle project management, handling the installation and funding mechanisms that exist for each location. So we do try to make this process super easy. We have roughly 100 or 110 now employees. When I got started here a little while ago, we had only about 25. So growing very, very quickly with lots of people now working in different departments. And again, when you start to look at site design, funding assistance, we need employees for each one of those functions. So growing really quickly, which is exciting. This is a little outdated now. It's roughly about 1,200 active stations, and we've got more than 5,000 now under contract or in construction throughout the country. So growing really quickly. That's the end of my sales pitch, guys, I promise. So I wanted to get into briefly just kind of your guys' understanding of what an electric vehicle is, right? We have 100% electric vehicles. So those are Teslas. I drive a Polestar. You've seen some ripping around. They do not operate on fossil fuels in any way, right? All of the power and range comes from a capacity plug and a rechargeable battery that's within the car. It's usually in the floor of the vehicle. And then there are plug-in hybrids, which do an interesting combination of both battery and some use of an internal combustion engine. So those can be plugged in and charged. If you see like a Toyota Prius Prime or a RAV4 Prime, Those are plug-in hybrids. So it means that there is an engine burning fossil fuels sometimes, but operates mostly on a battery. And then there's a traditional hybrid that doesn't plug in, right? That's what the original Prius was. And it does have an electric motor and a combustion engine in it. So this will just recharge the battery as the car is slowing down. So if anybody's actually driven an electric vehicle, this took me a while to get used to, but you don't generally use the brake pedal. It's the strangest thing in the world. As you release the accelerator, the car immediately starts to slow down, and that's what you use as your brake. And as it's slowing down, that system is actually recharging the battery as the car is slowing down. You've got to drive one to experience it. Once you drive it a few times, it's like, this is the best thing in the world. So, you know, I will probably never have to change the brakes on my car. Obviously, I don't need to do oil changes. So when you start to kind of think about the cost savings on operating an electric vehicle, they really do start to add up. I will never have to service my vehicle in the 3-year lease that I did on the Polestar. Never. So it's just interesting. There's a lot of cool technology being built right now from the OEMs. I know you guys have probably seen, you know, the statements out of Ford and GM and their commitment to go to an all electric, you know, line of vehicles by 2030, 2035. And that's followed by the Volvos of the world and Hyundai and Toyota and Nissan. They're all doing it. So you will get, you know, in conversations I've had now thousands of times with people, there's a lot of sentiment around, well, as soon as this person is out of office or wherever, that all that's going to change. Well, let me tell you, Ford and GM, they're making major statements by doing stuff like this, and it's not going to matter. So we start talking about where this world that we're living in is heading. You know, I generally think that we're kind of in the midst of one of the larger paradigm shifts in our culture. Right, we are looking at people that are looking for other options, and I don't think the cost of gasoline is playing that much of a factor in it, although it's helping. People are looking for alternatives, right? I think this environmental, you know, sustainability effort that we're making as a culture is actually impacting, and I'll show you some data out of the state of California to kind of back that up. And you will see a dramatic increase of registrations for electric vehicles over the first half of this year. People are looking at this option. You know, I have done tons of very large conferences where I've asked people to raise their hand if they drive an electric vehicle. And when I'm in the Northeast, it's maybe 3 to 5% of people who drive one today. And when I ask the next question, which is generally who expects their next vehicle within the next 5 to 10 years to at least consider one of these, a large majority of people raise their hand. And that's the effort that we're putting in to make this an accessible piece of technology, and ultimately for locations like your guys, an amenity on the location to allow people to travel to your site. Again, it's not every location is going to make a ton of sense to do a charging station at, right? I have restaurant owners who, listen, if they want it, I'd be happy to do it, but I'm not going to tell them that that's the smartest thing to do. I have other locations where it makes all the sense in the world, right? They have people who are going to come and need to travel from far away. You know, some of our tourist locations here in the Northeast, it's a no-brainer. And we'll get into some of the reasons kind of why in a minute. So there are 3 types of charging. Diana was getting to this, right? There is level 1, which is generally done at home, right? These are slow chargers for really long dwell times. They're usually what's called not networked. Okay, not networked means it doesn't have a software platform on the back end operating it. They're typically pretty inexpensive, but again, we're talking really low amounts of power going to a vehicle. All right, great for putting something in your own personal garage at home, but not great for public facing charging. Okay, when we get into public facing charging, now we're talking about level 2 or DCFC or level 3 charging, right? Level 2 charging is still fairly inexpensive. We're talking 3 to 8 hours of time to actually charge a vehicle to its capacity. And that can range from anywhere from a 2 kilowatt output to a 19 kilowatt output on the charger, right? And when we're talking about batteries that have 300 kilowatts of capacity and have 280-mile ranges on them, you tend to need to put a decent amount of power in. Again, this is not a requirement to to you guys as site hosts to need to feel like you need to charge a car that visits your site to capacity. That's not what this is about. I drive an electric car. I do not expect to pull up to a station and get a full charge everywhere I go. The greatest analogy anybody ever gave to me is it's very much like your cell phone. If there is a charger nearby and you have a cell phone, you tend to just plug it in. You don't generally just let it sit there and not do anything. So people are driving electric vehicles. If there's a charger on site, they will use it. All right. The charger that we build here in New York can actually do all of these levels and a bunch of levels in between, all in the same unit. So a lot of the historic chargers that have been around for a long time, you got to kind of pick one, and that's what you're stuck with. And generally they're a 7 kilowatt charger somewhere in there. So we built a unit that can do all of those ranges with the same unit. And the old days, when you put a charger in and you wanted to get more power, you'd have to rip out the hardware and start all the way over again. So we built something that's a little more what we're calling future-proofed. So as the cars get bigger and better and need more power, we can upgrade the amount of power going to the vehicle without having to redo everything. And then there's level 3 charging, or DCFC charging, right? This is direct current fast charging. I'll tell you guys right now, it is expensive, okay? We're talking minimum, you're looking at a $50,000 bill just for the piece of hardware to really quickly charge a car. These are great for gas stations and rest stops off of highways. I do have some larger retail establishments with big budgets who don't mind spending the money on them, but we're talking 20 minutes to an hour to charge a car, and anywhere from 50 to 350 kilowatts going to a car. The thing to keep in mind here when we're talking about infrastructure needs for each one of these, the level 2s operate on 208 volts, right? A typical kind of voltage capacity for most sites. So if you've got just a regular panel at the site, this can usually tap right into it. When we're going level 3 DCFCs, we need 277, 480 high voltage, 3-phase power. If that doesn't exist on site already, the cost to upgrade infrastructure to get to this level is also going to add 2 more dollar signs to this thing. So not exactly a great fit for everybody. Again, we're going to try and talk about solutions that make the most sense for your location so that, you know, obviously not everybody has this built into their budget, right? But there's always pretty good options. And again, I don't go into this assuming that every driver expects to get fully charged when they get there. Especially those like somebody coming from San Diego all the way to Northern California, they just need a place that if, as they're planning their trip, they would love to know that where they're going to end up, there's a charger there so that if they spend a day or an hour or 6 hours there, they can charge while they're walking around and then get back home. So when we start to talk about barriers to access, we need to just make a situation. It's like having a vending machine on site, right? It's like offering bathrooms, right? People just need to know that there are things there to make it a more flexible situation. Okay. Why now? All right. You guys live in California. I am sure you have all talked about the governor's recent ban on gas-powered cars by 2035. All right. That is a piece. And I will say New York is in the same boat, probably as of tomorrow, that we'll be doing the same thing. And yes, it's going to cause a lot of chaos and people freaking out. And how could they possibly do that? Let's not worry about that. Although it's a piece, right? I don't think that they need to force anybody to do this. I think this piece of data out of the state of California in Q1 of 2022, EV registrations increased 37% and now represent 17% of total market share. This is 5 times faster than anybody predicted as of 3 years ago. It's happening before your eyes. And do I think that the statement out of the governor's office has something to do with it? Maybe. But I think technology has gotten really good, right? These cars now go pretty far. My car goes almost 270 miles on a single charge. I can get just about anywhere with locations along the way to charge if I needed to. The other piece is incentives. Now, I was talking to Diana, and I would have loved for the state of California to make things easy, but of course they don't. So what the state of California has is 1 million counties and 1 million different utilities. And every county and utility has a slightly different program, right? They all are begging you guys to do this. So I have a link. I'm going to share this with Diana, but you can just as easily go to the U.S. Department of Energy's website and their alternative fuels data center, and it breaks this down by state. So you can obviously go through this and find your county and see what the state or county is offering at that location, right? If we're in this, which is the Cali VIP one, they're offering $5,500 per plug. Okay, so what that means is they'll give $5,500 per unit. So if there's a dual port unit, there's $11,000 they will give you towards the cost of the project. All right. This one in Northern California is $6,500 per connector, per port. So a dual port station will have 2 coming off of it. All of them have something crazy. The inland counties part of the Cal EVIP, 75% of total project costs up to a certain level, right? And you can see there's separate ones for the DCFC's level 3 charging, and there's separate ones for level 2, mostly because these projects cost a little bit less. And again, there are some languages in here about disadvantaged communities, and if it's not in a disadvantaged community, it's a little bit less. They're obviously trying to give equitable resources to disadvantaged areas, right? The largely overlooked areas when we're talking about stuff like this. But again, we're in different counties, right? Peninsula, Silicon Valley has a different program. This is a nice tool to figure out what is available to you as a property owner to get started. My team does know about all of these, so we can certainly help in facilitating you guys getting this stuff done and then securing this money. But they have some caveats, right? And what you'll see here, stations must be publicly accessible 24 hours a day. I know that terrifies you guys and terrifies just about every one of my customers, especially when I'm talking to like condo, associations who don't necessarily want strangers on site. There are some solutions to this. Again, it's the government's giving away free money. You're going to have to play a little bit by their rules. These are incentives, right? Which carry very few pieces of red tape. Right? It's not that complex. You need to send in site maps and a little bit of information of what you're actually putting into the ground. And then they usually just hit approve and cut checks. You'll see, right? There's lots of crazy stuff going on in here. Obviously there's like zero emission grants. This will cover everything that involves, this website will cover everything that involves electric vehicles, including actually like heavy duty zero emission vehicle grants. There's a difference to me and to everybody in this industry between incentives and grants, right? Grants take huge amounts of paperwork, lots of red tape, and they kind of say you might get it or you might not. Incentives mean everybody is open to this. We just need an application filled out and a little bit of information, and we'd love to help you get this done. There are some programs in like Southern California, Edison territory, where they'll do the install for you guys. They will literally do it. Take care of it, not charge you a penny, and they'll just take care of it. Sounds great. You just pay for the hardware and whatever software platform, and they'll take care of everything. There are different programs everywhere. The state, the utilities, the counties, they are begging you guys to do this. The interesting thing about these programs is they have a finite amount of money. So there are a couple of programs I can promise you within here that are out of money for right now. And what they do is they request more from the state of California and they potentially get more, right? We're in a situation here in New York where Con Edison, which is the large utility company in New York City, ran out of money. So all of the projects that didn't get submitted are now on hold. So don't let this money slip away from you guys. It is really an important piece to this whole thing because these projects are very expensive. But while the utilities or the states or the counties are throwing money at you to do these things, take advantage of it now. It's like, I've talked to lots of people who said, listen, nobody is coming to my site with an electric vehicle. I have two answers to that. One is they're not because you don't have one, or you don't have a charger, or it's either you spend this money now, or 5 years from now when you see EVs coming, you spend this much money then. It's a pretty straightforward thinking. The other thing to consider here in the state of California is, I don't know if you guys have heard about carbon offset credits. So they will actually issue credits based on the type of project, and EV charging stations happens to be one of them. So for every, piece of energy you send to a electric vehicle, they will actually give you a credit that you can then sell on this cap and trade program that they have. So again, the state of California, Washington State now is doing this. I think Oregon is now doing this. New York is, I'm sure, soon to follow, where they will literally pay you back for the power you're sending to the car. So just things to think about. The other thing I just keep thinking about is, and again, I know you guys have expanded to a kind of larger grasp of who you guys are, but this should be already a part of the brand that you guys have, right? As far as getting outside and being in the environment that you're in right now. I mean, electric vehicles and environmental sustainability is part of the brand already. The people who want to come to your sites are driving these vehicles. And our job, unfortunately, for some of you, you might think it's an unfortunate thing, is to facilitate them to keep coming back. And doing something as simple as a charging station is likely to be one of those things that would really help. So just to give you an idea, this is as of December of 2020. So the data is a little old. They only, for whatever reason, California only updates their data on, and this is from Atlas Public Policy. They only update their data every 2 years for whatever reason. New York does theirs every month. Every state does things a little different. But Atlas Public Policy is the big DC think tank that can, aggregates all of the data from the states. And just to give you some statistics, as of 2 years ago now on EVs on the road in the state of California, this number is well over 1 million now. And this was obviously more densely populated in LA and up near San Francisco and Sacramento a little bit. I wish I had a more updated map, but 700,000 or so, 628,000 EVs on the road in the state of California right now is not a little amount, right? This is a pretty substantial quantity of people driving these vehicles. And the things to think about, right, when talking about like consumer behavior of an EV driver, like when do people charge? Typically, I charge every day. Most of the people I know who drive electric vehicles charge every day, every couple of days. If they have a system at their house, they're charging overnight at their home. And still, current data shows, 80 to 70% of charging is done at home or at the workplace. Again, where are they doing this? It's wherever it's available, right? I use it whenever I'm at the airport and there's a charging station, I use it. Whenever I have to go give a speak at a conference center in a hotel, if they have a charging station, I'm using it. State parks in the state of New York, they're doing a very large deployment in state parks here in New York for all of the people they want to come to the site and use the site and come to the park. They have charging stations there. So, public chargers are generally used when the trip is a bit longer than their range is on their vehicle, right? If I have a 260-mile range, that means I have really 130 miles to, if I can't charge, to get somewhere and get back. If there's a charger at my end location, then my decision-making process becomes much easier, right? And again, just some data, right? I think there's a lot of information out there. A lot of it is kind of fuzzy. This is data that we've, created based on our driver usage and stuff we've developed. I mean, typical charging for an EV driver is anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Again, I think that has a lot to do with the type of site it's at. Most of my multifamily apartment complexes, it's more like 5 to 7 hours. And then, EV drivers as a demographic, right, are typically looking for something to do. Nobody wants to pull up to a charger and sit there for an hour in their car. They want to go do something. You guys are set up in such a beautiful way to not only offer them something to charge while they're at your location, but give them something to do. right? There's been tons and tons of studies on the economic impact of a charger, right? Get people to come to your site. They generally spend money while they're there. So we're not just looking at charging stations, but also how it might impact your local economy or your immediate business and all sorts of things, right? And obviously increased dwell time is going to help with, you know, the business be a little bit more market resilient, right? I think the goal for you guys is to keep people there as long as they can to enjoy the location or spend money or do whatever it is. But EV drivers typically want to do something while they're on site. If you guys have great hiking trails or whatever it is, such a perfect scenario for a charging station. Let them plug in, let them come onto the site, walk the site, enjoy the place they're going to, and then they can leave with the confidence that they can get home. Ideal places for EV charging, right? I kind of have gone through this a bit, right? Hotels, lodging, multifamily apartment complexes. So obviously we do a lot of shopping markets, some dining locations, some big retail establishments. The attractions one has been the bigger one for us lately, with locations like Legoland here in the Northeast and some other big ones. If there's something for people to do, that's where a great location is to be, right? And just think about it logically. You have an amusement park, right? You want people to come and spend money in the amusement park. What a great opportunity to have charging stations be a part of that offering. Just to give you guys an idea of what the federal government and people think about the sales forecast for the next 10 years or so for EVs, I would say this piece of information is going on 2 years old now, and they have largely underestimated what it is as of right now. So I think we're going to be pretty shocked by 2030 to see how many people are driving an EV vehicle here in the States. We're already kind of starting to outpace Europe, which is typically ahead of us in these technologies. So just things to consider, right? I think this stuff is important when you guys are making decisions. The other things to consider, right? And again, we do just sell hardware and we do just supply software and networking. We do full turnkey deployments if you guys want us to do them, right? But things to consider, again, as a full turnkey deployment, we handle most of this stuff. But if you guys want to go do it on your own, the things to consider are zoning and permitting. California is pretty friendly with permitting for EV chargers. I've got some areas of Western New York that are not super friendly. So just keep it in mind, right? You will need a permit. You will need to make sure it's zoned appropriately. Incentives and funding, we've kind of gone through that. There's so much information broken down by county, by state, by utility. Do tons of research. Again, there's lots of tools out there from the federal government that will help break it down for you guys. Again, I have a team of people that this is all that they do for a living, so we can help assist. And then ongoing requirements and maintenance. One of the things to consider here is proprietary versus non-proprietary charging hardware. All right, so the big company out of California is called ChargePoint. I'm sure you guys have heard of them. They have what's considered proprietary hardware. So that means if you install ChargePoint network systems onto your site, you guys are stuck with ChargePoint software systems for forever. And if you're not happy with the service or whatever the case may be, if you wanted to change that, you need to rip out the hardware and install something new, right? That's a very large investment to just throw in the garbage. I have been doing swaps of ChargePoint stations on the East Coast for a year now. It's fairly common. What we build here and what we've integrated our software on are non-proprietary pieces of hardware, which means at the end of whatever term of software you're going to pay for, you guys have the ability to shop the open market without having to replace the hardware. That's a really important thing, right? Our goal as an organization is to keep you on my network and software system, and whether that's through pricing or function and features or customer service, like our job is to earn your business, not just guarantee it by sticking a proprietary piece of hardware there. So keep that in mind as you're shopping around. Like there are a lot of brands that you put that piece of hardware in, you are stuck with that system for forever. There are other companies, not just mine. I'm not saying we have the only system that operates this way, but our system specifically operates in a non-proprietary fashion so that you guys are as flexible as you need down the road. If 3 years from now I sell you, I sell you a software system for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, you guys call me and say, Will, it's been great, but I found something way less expensive. It does the same thing. If I can't match that deal or give you something better, you guys should have every right to go get that other software, and you can, right? It's as simple as sending them serial numbers, they upload it, and it's operating again. So keep that in mind, right? A lot of the maintenance plans that you guys may have heard about and see are generally just remote maintenance, right? They log into it, they try and read the code. If they can't see it, they say, well, we're gonna have to send somebody out and here's a bill. Right? So make sure what you guys are reading, right? When you see maintenance plans, find out what's covered in that, right? Is a full unit replacement required, right? Is it included in that pricing? Who's going to be the person to come out and fix it, right? Is it a third-party contractor? Is it a certified installer, somebody who's ready to actually and has worked on these things before? Just all things you got to consider, all right? The proprietary, non-proprietary thing is a big thing. It's one of the big reasons we got into this business, right? We got started in energy efficiency and LED upgrades mostly. We started doing EV chargers. We didn't really like the way the hardware performed, so we said, let's build our own. We didn't really like the way the software performed that existed in the market. We said, let's build our own. And it's what's gotten us to this point. So it seems to be working. But keep these things in mind. I think these are all very important things to consider when actually doing these projects. Again, there are companies, not just my own. We're not the only ones that do a full turnkey deployment system. But things to think about as you're considering this as an option for your site. I'll just give you a really brief breakdown and kind of understanding of software. I'm sure it's a bit convoluted to you guys as of right now. So generally, most chargers operate kind of the same way, where there will be a QR code. You'll see it here on the front of every piece of hardware. The driver is expected to scan that piece of QR code. It'll download an app. They'll enter in their card information and they'll hit start charge. And that's when the transaction begins to happen, right? That money is generally across the board. It's done quarterly now. And there are some different options there as well, but generally quarterly, right? The software collects all the money that has been generated on a station and sends you a check for the money you've made on it. You can charge for the power, okay? You do not have to give it away for free. Most of my customers that are not municipalities who are trying to just give stuff away for free are charging a markup for the power. Okay, so if you're paying 20 cents a kilowatt hour, generally you're charging a driver 40 or 50 cents a kilowatt hour in California. Okay, there are some time of use scenarios in California, which more or less tells you have to charge more and charge less at certain times of the day. They're obviously trying to encourage people to use them at certain times of the day, so the grid's not as stressed. But again, there's so much information, right? We have the mobile app for a driver. That's how they actually find stations and activate charges. We do also have a full charge management platform to allow you as the site host to see what's been going on in the stations, how often people have been using them, how many unique drivers you have gotten over the last 30, 60, 90 days. It's kind of interesting when you start to see how many new people have come to my site just from having a charging station. So there's lots of data that can be provided to you guys to make interesting decisions. I've had lots of customers just start something small with a single dual port station, and after they see the usage, they've added another and added another. You'll hear this out of everybody in the industry, right? It's if you build it, they will come. I'm sure everybody's seen the movie Field of Dreams. It's really true, right? If you build it, they will start to show up. Once it starts to appear on the various different apps, and again, we're working on like roaming agreements with ChargePoint, so their stations show up on ours and our stations show up on theirs. They'll appear on PlugShare, which is the large website that aggregates all of the charging stations in North America into one site, so people can plan trips and do things like that. This will also allow you to change pricing on a dime. So if you guys had a big event in town and you thought it might be a decent opportunity, you have public-facing chargers, right? There's a big event in town, you can potentially increase the cost of the power a couple of cents and make some more money. So you can do lots of interesting things with the software system. Keep in mind, to get a lot of those incentives we were talking about earlier, they need to be networked, right? This is the network, right? This is how it actually operates. And a lot of that is because, you know, these utilities and states don't just give money away for nothing. What do they want? They want data. So that software system actually collects the data that the state of California, the state of New York, the state of Colorado, whatever it is looking for, and sends it to them. So they have all sorts of data. So it's not for free, right? They want data. So that's what the networking piece is about. Again, we've built it. We actually, the way we built our systems is based on direct conversations we've had with the North American EV driver group, right? So there's a group of thousands and thousands and thousands of EV drivers who communicate amongst each other on what's a problem, what's not working that well. So we took a lot of those people and surveyed them and said, what did you want to see? How do you want it to work? And built it accordingly. And we do upgrades to this thing, usually monthly, based on, you know, reports we've been getting on functionality. They want to see this, perfect, we just do it. I've got a team of almost 30 software developers now who just constantly are improving and building. We do free over-the-air upgrade pushes all the time, so it's not like you guys have to pay more for some new version. Try to make it easy, right? That's the whole goal. I think ultimately right now, this technology is still a want and not necessarily a need. And the only reason people buy things they need, right? Well, the only reason they buy things they want is because either A, it's inexpensive, or B, it's easy to execute on, right? Things that people need, they just buy regardless of price. You need it, you have to have it, you buy it. Things you want, it needs to be simple, it needs to be fairly inexpensive. That's why we've built this ecosystem here, to ultimately try to make this thing as inexpensive as it can be while leveraging incentives, and also make the process easy. I have lots of customers who just kind of point and shoot and say, I need 2 right there, and they step away and we kind of take care of the rest. It can be that simple. You can get as involved or uninvolved as you want. I have some customers who do the installs themselves. It's really not that complicated. If you can install an electrical outlet, you can install a level 2 charger. Don't try and install a level 3 charger. It's lots of power. Leave that to a professional. Just to give you a general concept, right? And again, I would love to be able to put like hard timelines on each one of these. Every municipality and local government is a little bit different, but typically it'll follow this kind of track, right? A project concept. We'd meet with you guys, tell you about, you know, locations and qualify for funding and stuff like that. We'd then send somebody out to do a real actual site evaluation. So we'd come on site and evaluate the location for feasibility. Once we're good with that, there would be, you know, a real quote delivered to you guys. You guys would sign off on it if you wanted to do the project. And then we go into permitting, make sure all the local permits and utility providers know what's going on. They sign off, say, yep, you're good to go. Then we handle all the funding mechanisms and make sure all the funding is secured ahead of time. We don't like to do projects and then try and secure funding, because people get stuck with giant bills sometimes and it's scary. So we always secure funding before an install even happens. Once funding is secured and we get a pre-approval letter from whatever municipality it is, we'll do an install, and then we're just into post-install support, right? Supporting drivers, supporting your site to make sure it's going as smooth as it can be. Obviously, lots of training on how to use stations and apps and all that kind of stuff. But this is a general idea of how this process ultimately flows. Does that make sense to you guys? I have done from start to finish in as soon as 60 days. I've had some that get stuck in here in local permitting offices that can take 3-4 months. It's very site dependent. So just keep that in mind. That's really what I had for now. You guys see an interesting picture of a nice deployment. This is at a fairly large shopping mall here in the Northeast. These have cable retraction systems on them to keep the cables up off the ground. Again, they're a little bit more money, but they are nice. Otherwise, typically there would just not be this pole, and it would be a loop for people to wrap a cable around. So I'd love to open this up to Q&A and try and get to as many as we can. I'm hoping you guys have some questions.
Hi, Will, thank you so much. That was, I learned a lot. That was a lot of information, but it really broke it down pretty simply and made it seem very accessible. even
Try.
to our smaller parks. This is something that could be accessible. We do have a couple questions. Please feel free to either put your questions in chat or the Q&A, either one. I'll be checking both. Serena asks, how can you figure out if your transformer will need to be upgraded when adding level 2s?
So typically you would call the actual utility, right? The local utility would typically do, they can generally do this from their site. But if they have to come out, they'll actually come out and do what's called a load test to make sure that if you need more power, they'll upgrade a transformer. If you have enough to satisfy what the transformer is already doing, they wouldn't need to. But you can call the local utility and they'll tell you that, and it doesn't cost you any money to have them tell you. And ultimately, you'll need to know, right, I'm doing 4 level 2 chargers, and the draw on 4 level 2 chargers is 32 amps at max each. So I've got 128 amps of power I need. Is that going to work for the local utility? And they'll give you an answer, yes or no. And then if it's yes, depending on where we're talking about, Serena, like typically either the incentives that are available will cover that cost as well. So that incentive is generally covering all of the infrastructure, right? So all of the upgrades to service, upgrades to local panels, or transformer upgrades. If it exceeds the amount available of the incentive, that's when you start coming out of pocket for a little bit of money. It's called kayak cost, right? Customer cost. So local utility is somebody you're definitely gonna want to touch base with on that, but you're gonna kind of need to know how many chargers and what kind you're gonna be putting in. And then I see another question from you on permitting separately or together for solar or an RV park. I would recommend doing it together, only because the same questions you're going to get asked for solar are going to be the same for EV charging. And it shouldn't mess anything up for you. RV parks are tough. I'll tell you right now, they just are. They typically don't have enough power, which is probably why you're looking at solar as well. But typically there's not enough power to make this happen, even though you've probably got 110 outlets for the RVs lined up. I've done a couple, so if we need to get on offline and talk about it separately, we can. But I would probably recommend doing it together if I had to guess. What else is there? There can't be just two.
That can't be the only questions that we have.
Otherwise, I'm so good at my job, man.
You are really good at your job, apparently. Yeah. It looks like Serena had, oh, she just said thank you. All right, anybody else? Any questions? That's it. I found this really, really interesting. It kind of cleared a lot of things up for me, and would like to continue this conversation because I think it's important, and I think it's one that that there's a lot of interest in. And like we had talked earlier, Will, I think things are going to be changing pretty rapidly. So
there's a lot of noise. That's the biggest issue, and this is largely from our sector, right? The technology sector, where there's so much noise, and it's tough to cut through the noise and just figure out who can do something simply and make it easy for me to understand. And you know, it's hard, right? There's so much advertising and marketing and stuff going on, and the governments and utilities don't love, like there are some utilities who have programs here in the Northeast that don't put it on their website. You have to call and find out. So it's complex and can be tough. And ultimately, like I said earlier, the more difficult it is, the more likely you guys are to freeze and just do nothing. I think that's a mistake. I think there's an opportunity to give some effort, and I see some more stuff to make it worthwhile. How much would a Lightning Ford and EV travel trailer use? It's not so much how much it would use. The question, Serena, really is what kind of charger are you putting in, right? You can put a level 2 charger, and that guy driving the Lightning would be more than happy, and that's going to pull X amount of power. You can put a level 3 charger, which he'd be really happy. You'd spend a lot more money, and it would put in lots of more power, which means you need a lot more off of the grid. So it's not so much the car that's coming, it's what the piece of equipment you are putting in to charge the car. Does that make more sense? Serena, man, all over it.
And I think Gordon asked, will there be a way to view the recording? Yes, Gordon, we are recording it, so I will get that out to everyone. I think probably within the next couple of days, we'll send it out.
So Serena's got a good question about how long would my sites be down when installing level 2s. So typically, how this would work is a trench would get dug, conduit would be put in to bring power from location A to where the chargers are, right? All the wire would get pulled, the stations would get wired and mounted, and then it's really a quick disconnect, maybe 30 minutes at most to make a connection, flip the main, and then they're powered back on. So it's pretty quick. Do I make a product? Yeah, so the product that we develop here in New York is that flex charger, right? So it can have, it's not going to do 100 amps. There's no 100 amp plug that sits on a level 2 charger. Once you get above 80, right, that's where you get into needing 3-phase power to power it. But the charger that we make here in New York, right, can run anywhere from, I think it's 16 amps all the way up to 80 amps on the actual output. So we can make it variable and do whatever you need. And that's in the same piece of hardware.
Anything else? That's it, right? Possibly.
Maximum distance, Gordon. Maximum distance that the stations can be from transformer breaker to the station. So there is no maximum distance theoretically, right? Mostly because the further you get away and have to travel power across a piece of copper, just the bigger the piece of copper has to become. So typically, I would say we try to stay, and this is more just the bigger the piece of copper, the more expensive it becomes, right? So typically, I try to stay under 400 or 500 feet in distance. Once you get above that, the gauge of that wire becomes really thick and just is very expensive. There are other options that exist out in the world that on the level 3 side that have battery systems actually tied in with the charger, and you can go hundreds of feet in between. But we're talking, $250,000 for a piece of hardware. Gigantic amounts of money, not necessarily great for you guys. But if you're within 400 or 500 feet, you're okay. Once you get out past there, it becomes very expensive. The amount of copper that's going to have to run out there, even if we're going to aluminum, is really expensive. So this is a pretty good question, something I didn't address. So does each level 2 need its own circuit? Not necessarily, right? The charge point units and a couple other companies do this where there will be 2 plugs on a single station and they're wired on the same circuit. What's interesting about that system is when 2 people plug into the same station, it immediately splits the power in half. Okay. The ones that we build, we wire on the same circuit, so that if 2 people plug into the same station, they get the same amount of power. What our hardware does do is what's called local load management. So I can set a site, whether it's 2 chargers or 200 chargers, to only get to 80 amps. Let's say you only have 80 or 100 amps of available power to do this on. I can still put 10 chargers on, and theoretically they would pull 80 amps, right? On each one, I would need 800 amps. But I could set the site to 100 so that one person plugs in, right? They're going to get the full 80 amps coming to their car. 2 people plug in, no matter where they are on that site, it'll start to now downgrade the amount of output. And that goes all the way downstream until people start pulling away. So that's a great solution for where people don't have exactly the amount of power available, but still have some and maybe want a couple extra chargers. It's going to be pretty rare for you to have 10 people plugged in at the same time, right? But again, it's this local load management that looks at the whole site, and as it gets close to the maximum we set it to, it starts to step everybody down until people pull away, and then it starts stepping them back up. So that's a way you can do that without having to spend thousands of dollars upgrading infrastructure. Just something to consider.
Did you see a question from Julie?
RV parks, I have done quite a few of them here in upstate New York, believe it or not. They are looking at it. I don't know how you guys have the RV parks in California. The ones in New York are kind of thrown together a little crazy with infrastructure and power and doing some crazy stuff. So you've got Rivian, Ford, GMC, all putting out trucks with some pretty big towing capacity that are going to be starting to pull RVs. So they are doing it. And I think one of the reasons behind it, obviously there's power, right, for the RV parks for those pieces of equipment, but you can't monetize the power, right? So a charging station allows you to monetize the power. People are going to pay for the space for 3 days or whatever it is. And then you can also bill them for the power they're going to be pulling into their car. So it is just another revenue stream for you guys, ultimately to help offset, whatever the initial investment is. There are some federal tax credits available to you guys as well. So there is a 30% federal tax credit you can claim. It's up to $100,000 now. So if you spend $10,000 on a system, you'll get a $3,000 tax credit through the federal government to come back to you. So yes, people are looking at RV parks here in the Northeast. I can only imagine they're looking at them in California as well. And if they're not, they should.
Well, I think one of the biggest questions right now is do I spend money or do I go through the process of putting in a station? Or do I figure out a way to change the infrastructure in my park, right? Do I allow for these to be at all campsites? Because like you said, we are already seeing, the Ford F-150, we're seeing the Rivian, we're seeing, Tesla's able to pull the new Airstream that's, self-propelled, right? So all of these things are coming. And do we have time? Sure. You're probably not going to see a Tesla pulling one of those Airstreams tomorrow. No. But they're there. And, and I'm actually heading to another RV manufacturer here at the end of next month. But when I was in Tampa, we went and saw the all electric Winnebago, right? So yes, these things are coming. So when you're making a decision on what do I need to do with my RV park, you really have to look at what the future is going to hold and what your budget is and make the determination. Do I invest in a small scale item that might last me this long, or do I go bigger and put these in every single site that are going to give me a little bit more?
And I'll say we do some interesting kind of leasing options and charging as a service to kind of, if you guys are a little bit less OpEx heavy and more or less CapEx heavy and more OpEx, like there are other options. It might be tough if you guys are closing the site down for a certain amount of time. You'll have some expense there. But there's not just like, here's a $20,000 bill and go for it. There's lots of we've got financing and stuff available. We've got charging as a service, which is just, a monthly fee to have it there on site. And you guys still keep the revenue. There's lots of interesting mechanisms to have it make sense and fit into a budget. But yeah, I mean, looking at what the industry is doing around you and trying to fit into the mix and make sure you don't have gaps in your operational capacity is important.
Does anyone have any additional questions? We're at the top of the hour. I know we started a little bit late with getting everybody into the system, but if there are any additional questions, we'll take a couple more before we sign off. Looks like that's going to be it. I want to thank Will so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. My next question is going to be, are you going to come and speak at our summit, right?
I'd be happy to.
Put it on your calendar. The last week of March, you're going to be in California. We'll just get that out there right now. This recording is going to be available. And if anybody has any questions, I can certainly connect you to Will. I can, see what I can do to answer some of them. No, but yeah, I can certainly connect you to Will and we can get you some answers. So Will, appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
Anytime, guys. Great talking to everybody, and really do not hesitate to reach out to Diana or myself. I talk to people for free all the time. You won't get a bill in the mail, I promise.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.